We are both live streaming this event for people who could not be here today, and we are just delighted to see so many people in this room as well. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Department of Geology, Geography, and Environment at Kelvin University to these FIRES presentation, where FIRES stands for First Year Research in Earth Sciences. And I'm Professor Deanna Van Dyke, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to enjoy working with this project for many years, but with this group of people, particularly this year. So you are going to hear from FIRES students who have been doing research this semester. These students were guided and helped along by FIRES research mentors who are in the room as well. And so I invite you to talk with them afterwards. They'll be wearing their name tag as FIRES mentors. We also have the support of a FIRES coordinator. And so it's been quite a team to get us to this particular point. But what we're very excited about is being able to share 6 research projects, what we did for those research projects, and what the results of those projects were. So I'd like to invite the first team to come forward and to get themselves set up while I'm continuing this introduction. And so each team is going to take you to either one or several locations. They'll describe where those are going to be, and they're going to talk about different topics. So we'll have a progression of topics throughout the afternoon. I will have each of the teams introduce their title and introduce themselves. But first, we're going to be looking at a topic that really is talking about what is currently happening along the shoreline with the dunes. So let's welcome our first team.
My name is Deanne, this is Abby, and that is Mary Claire. And our topic is emerging dunes found along the Lake Michigan shoreline. Dune features are constantly changing on the shoreline. So the purpose of our study was to analyze the change in dune features and contribute to a larger data set in order to compare and predict the future shoreline. To do this, we mapped dune features on GPS units and measured the fore-dune height. And the research question that we worked off of was, how are the dune features changing along the shoreline?
We had 4 different study objectives. Our first one was to map the dune features. The second one was to measure the fore-dune height. The third to record fore-dune characteristics. And the fourth one was to compare the changes of the dune features compared to the summer 2024 data to the fall 2024 data. Our study area was at P.J. Hoffmaster State Park. It's on the eastern side of Lake Michigan. And we mapped around 4,000 meters, which is approximately 2.5 miles. And we walked along here for the shoreline for our study.
So first we have our dune methods. We started and we mapped with a GPS unit all the different dune features. We started off with our shadow dunes, and we mapped incipient dunes, fore dunes, dune ridges, disturbed areas, and sand ramps. And in order to do this, we stood parallel to the dune, or the feature, as you can see, and we walked parallel to it. And then once the dune feature ended, we stopped the line, and that gave us the data of the horizontal measurement of the dune feature. We then mapped fore-dune heights. We used a ruler to do this data, and we mapped it when we saw a drastic height change in the dunes, and we mapped it at the highest point of the dune that we saw and the smallest point of the dune that we saw. We used comparison, so we compared the summer 2024 data that was provided for us from previous research teams to our fall 2024 data that we collected during our research project. We used Excel to do some calculated percentages. We calculated it by doing the fore-dune measurements that we got divided by the shoreline measurements that we collected as well. So these are our dune features that we observed. To start off, we have a shadow dune. A shadow dune is a small mound of sand, very, very small, and it can have vegetation on it, but doesn't always have to. We have a sand ramp, which is an accumulation of sand on an angle gradually decreasing. Up here we have a disturbed area, which here you can see the trampling of a path on the dunes, and you can see the lack of vegetation in one area. We have an incipient foredune, which is between a shadow dune and a foredune, and the incipient dune has vegetation on it and is a greater mound of sand than a shadow dune is. We have a foredune, which incipient foredune will turn into a foredune. Right here, you can see it. It has more vegetation and it's a higher mound of sand. And eventually the foredune will turn into a dune ridge. And you can tell a dune ridge difference from a foredune by the older vegetation and by it being greater and taller than the foredune.
We also calculated the results for the dune features. So as you can see for these colored graphs, each of the colors represent a different dune feature, and they correspond with the graph below. So as you see, the blue line corresponds with the blue line down here to show where it's at on the GPS unit. And you'll notice that the most common features was the incipient dunes and the four dunes. And those are in the yellow and orange. And we also noticed that the four dunes were present along 81% of the shoreline that we mapped. We also calculated the four dune heights. So the sum of the four dune distances was around 3,000 meters, and the height ranged from 0.2 to 1.6 meters. And you can see all those heights in centimeters up above. And then down below, you can see the recent sand deposition building onto that four dune. We also compared our results. So we measured the beach width, which is the distance between the shoreline and any dune boundaries, which could be the dune ridge, foredune, or incipient dune. We measured that in meters. And then in the summer, the beach width was around 15 meters. And then in the fall, it was around 45 meters. So it increased about 30%, the beach width did. Then we also calculated the foredunes. Foredunes had around 46% of the shoreline in summer, and then 81% in the fall. So that also had a 34% increase in features, or in foredunes. We also had, we're going to do questions at the end. But so other features that we mapped was sand ramps, which had the largest decrease of 25%, and then the dune ridges had a 33% increase. And you can see all of our calculations down here below.
So we found that there was a continual development, with our data, we found that there was a continual development of sand deposits into different dune features. Foredunes, dune ridges, and beach width all increased. And we think this can be attributed to storms, storm patterns, the amount of people present, seasons, lake levels, and study area difference. So our study area was shifted slightly south from the 2024 summer study area, and we found that there were more foredunes in the south area of PJ Hoffmeister. So in conclusion, the most present dune characteristic was incipient and foredunes. There was a significant change of water levels, which decreased, dune features, which just had general change happening, and an overall dune growth and progression. And we came to this conclusion by mapping points of interest.
We would like to thank the sources that provided us with our equipment, and then we also would like to thank the literatures that we read to be able to provide us with knowledge to complete our research project this semester.
We have some time for questions after each presentation, and we're going to ask people to speak into the mic, which Zach is going to bring over to you when you've got a question.
Was there a typo or something? Because it seemed it was a 15 to 45 meter increase. Seems like more like a 200% increase in width.
So the summer data had the 15 meters, and then the fall had the 45 meters. So then that's a 30% increase from the 15.
It seems like tripling the width. It seems like it's like triple the width.
Yeah, I think we were working off of percentages on most of them, and then for beach width, it only made sense to work off of meters, and there might have been a slight calculation error there.
Okay.
Thanks for this. My question is about like if you wanted to apply your methods to even further back, do you think you could use maybe like aerial imagery to identify these different types of dunes and then make similar kinds of observations or calculations on this? And if you can't, which of those dunes or dune features would be the most difficult, do you think, to identify? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that would have been a really interesting thing to do. I think some dune features would probably be harder to identify than others. Beach width strikes me as one that would probably be easier to identify based on aerial image. But then I don't know specifically, but I'm wondering if it's probably would have been harder to tell the difference between certain types of dune features, because that can be difficult when it's like an ever-changing process, as if you're only working with one image.
Yeah, thanks.
You mentioned human impacts in your discussion section. What human impacts have you observed during your study, and how much do you think that impacted the results of your study or would impact over a longer period of time?
So I think that human impacts we observed was there were several paths that were going up and down the dunes that we measured. So that can cause like sand deposition and it can cause erosion more quickly with the human impacts. And then also with the beach width, the more people on the beach, it could affect the shadow dunes, which could get destroyed. And then that messes up the entire like transition between shadow and incipient and foredunes. So it can make a greater impact if there's not dunes that are being created on the beach.
Right, let's thank our presenters. And in the transition from one presentation to the next, we're going to have the second group come up. I'm going to switch over the PowerPoint. I'm also going to explain that in this room here, we have been passing out some feedback forms. We're very appreciative of the Michigan State's grant funding for this project. And so it's optional, but if you would provide some feedback, that would be helpful. Students in the class, if you've got a feedback form, you don't have to fill that one out. And on Zoom, we're making those feedback forms available as well. You can fill them out for individual presentations or simply at the end of the presentation would be fine. Something that we also do in class occasionally, so I'm going to invite the audience to do that as well between every presentation, is take a minute to just stand up and stretch. And we usually stretch in some type of format that has something to do with the topic that we've been talking about. So you might stand up and stretch right now as a foredo. That would be growing in size and spreading. Okay, there will be more opportunities to stretch and for the in-person audience to get refreshments also throughout the day. We are now going to our site that was furthest south along the lake shore, and you're going to be hearing a very different look at some of the activity that's happening. So I'll have this team introduce themselves, but let's welcome them.
Hello, I'm Ewell. This is Sam, Reese, and Nathan. And this semester, we researched the threats to Cirsium pitcheri at Rosie Mountain National Area.
So as mentioned before, we researched Cirsium pitcheri, better known as pitcher's thistle. This is a plant that grows in areas of moderate disturbance, and they grow in very specific climate areas. The plants have a very long juvenile period in their lifespans. It's about 5 to 8 years, and after that period, the plants will flower, reproduce, and then die. Due to this very specific environment and the prolonged juvenile stage, threats to this species of plant can have very, very, very large negative effects on populations.
Yeah, so our research question was, what are the most prominent threats to the pitcher thistle population, and specifically at the Rosie Mountain Natural Area? And our research question was, for our hypothesis is that herbivory, which is when plants or animals eat the plants, will be the most prominent threat to the population.
So our objectives for this study was to map the individual locations of the pitcher thistle plants and to record the herbivory, as well as to record sand movement and other potential threats to the thistle.
So as stated in the title, we worked in a specific blowout in Rosie Mountain Natural Area, just outside of Grand Haven, Michigan. So our blowout was off the main boardwalk, but relatively close to the lake shore.
All right, so our first method was to map the pitcher thistle location and to record the herbivory using a GPS device, as you can see in the picture right here. Our second method was to record sand movements with the same GPS device, and as well as to locate and put down sand traps and erosion pins, which you can see on this map here. You can see all the individual spots that we've placed them. And then our third method was to observe other potential threats, again mapping them GPS system, and to look for signs of trampling and insect damage, such as like weevils and things like that.
So this is our main map on the location of the pitcher thistle. On the legend here, you can see that the green dots indicate pitcher thistle without herbivory, and the red dots indicate pitcher thistle with herbivory. You can also see that the brown outlines indicate the blowout area, and the black dashed line indicates some deer paths. In the top right corner here, you can see the second series of blowouts that we mapped about 500 meters north of the main site. And we mapped a total of 269 pitcher thistle throughout both areas. About 51% of these were in the juvenile life stage. And then you can also see that most of the pitcher thistle mapped were in the northern side of the blowout, as the southern side had more dense vegetation prohibiting it from growth.
Next, we have the thistle conditions, and we mainly focused on herbivory of the plants. We noticed that 30 out of the 269 mapped thistles showed herbivory, which is about 11% of our thistles. We also noticed that around 90% of the thistles mapped were with herbivory were of the juvenile stage. Next, we also have sand movement. We noticed a lot of sand movement, especially on the third week of our study, capturing a lot of sand in our sand traps, which we also have a graph of the wind data from PJ Hoffmaster State Park, just to show that relationship.
So going with sand movement, we also used erosion pins to monitor that. So overall, our pins showed a main pattern of deposition during the time frame we studied. Using this graph, reading it, any bar that's going down represents deposition. Erosion. And any bar going up represents deposition. So as you can see, most bars are going up. We think that this is probably correlated to the wind speeds that were occurring at the time of study, because I remember our second week, and as you could see in the Hoffmaster data in the previous slide, it was really, really windy on that day of study. So that might relate to these patterns seen here.
So one of the most interesting things we found from our data was the difference in herbivory between our two study areas. In the main blowout, only 6% of pitcher thistle had herbivory, compared to the small series of blowouts, which had about 25%. And we figure this is likely because the main blowout, as you said, has the boardwalk right across it, which could decrease the deer activity with the human traffic. And then herbivory affects the life stages of the pitcher thistle, because when the plant loses its leaf from herbivory, it'll spend all of its energy regrowing that leaf instead of its root system. And the root system is one of the primary reasons that when it decides to flower. So prolonged herbivory can keep the juvenile stage going on and on. And then sand burial is a threat mostly for seedlings, because once they hit about 75% of burial, they have a strong chance of dying. But this is less of a threat for the juvenile stage because it's bigger.
In conclusion, we noticed that the largest threat to our population was the herbivory in the area. There wasn't a ton, but there was also a lot. And our blowout did have a very thriving population of the Cirsium pitcheri, despite these small threats in the area.
You mentioned that we're looking at people. Were you also looking at deer herbivory? And when you're saying like 6%, 25%, that's both animal and insect herbivory?
That was mainly just the animal herbivory. We didn't really find any, especially weevil, evidence.
From your pictures, I saw that a lot of the pictures this are very tiny. Are they hard to find?
I would say they weren't hard to find because they were like everywhere we looked in the bigger blowout. So it was, and taking like smaller steps and like looking at our feet the whole time, it wasn't super hard to find them.
How large of an area for the blowout?
Any of you have a guess?
I would say like roughly the size of this room.
Maybe a
About,
little bigger.
yes.
That was the
large
large one.
Yeah.
The ones up in the northern area were much smaller.
Could you tell what specific animals were performing in herbivory, or was it just like something's been eating?
So we couldn't really tell. It was more like something's been eating this, but we presume deer due to the large amounts of deer trails and footprints that we discovered in the blowout area.
Why did you choose to study this particular plant?
Is that a question for one of us? I feel like we all have to answer that. So I chose it because it's more on the like ecology side of the subject, which I find really interesting. I also really love looking at dune systems and geomorphology and other things like that, but I find this stuff the most fascinating. Anything to do with plants and relationships.
Yeah, Yeah, so I actually have done a little bit of work on this actually exact same blowout in previous times. So I thought it was kind of interesting to see the differences between the results then and now.
I just think plants are cool.
I'm the same as Nathan. I also worked on this blowout before, so I was interested in that.
Did you see any evidence of citrus thistle that were mature or haven't flowered?
I think we saw a lot of dead pitcher thistle that had evidence of flowering, but we actually only saw like 2 that were still alive that had flowered.
I think we forgot to mention this is a threatened species. So they are pretty rare.
Okay, while we do our transition, while you're stretching, you can stretch as a pitcher thistle that's growing, or you can imitate a deer about to attack. Okay, geographically, for our next presentation, we're going to go to a site that's about halfway between our previous 2 sites. We're going to continue with the vegetation theme, and let's welcome our next presenting group.
Good afternoon. I'm Susanna. This is Lilia, Jace, Hope, and Lucas. And we're going to talk about our study that we conducted from October 26th to November 7th, studying the characteristics of succession on a Lake Michigan blowout.
In order to understand our research project, it is essential that we understand first what succession actually is. Succession can be defined as directional, predictable change in community structure over time. Specifically in dunes, the community structure changes that we're talking about is things like sand movement, the shape of the dune, and plants that are there, as well as other variables. In our study, we are looking at a blowout that was in primary succession. Our team defines primary succession as succession of an uninhabited area that is not initiated by disturbance to the dune. For a dune community, primary succession looks very similar to these pictures below that you see. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that these pictures were taken from another study that was done at Wilderness State Park here in Michigan. So you can see a dune 30 years into primary succession is mainly just dune like beach grass, other stuff like that. At 150 years into primary succession, it's more bigger shrubs and some scattered pine trees. And then all the way into 400 years in the primary succession, it's now traded all of the grass out and the shrubs, and it's now a dense forest of pine trees and other ferns like that. So our research question was, what do site characteristics of a blowout suggest about its stage of dune succession? Our study objectives were to document plant species and their prevalence, record the sand movement, and to measure organic carbon prevalence in the soil.
So this is our study area. It took place in Western Michigan, near Lake Michigan, and it was Kitchell-Lindquist Hartford Dunes Preserve. So this is the location within Michigan. This is our blowout specifically within the preserve. And you can't see it in this photo, but to the left over here was Lake Michigan, and then some houses and other buildings between the blowout and Lake Michigan. and to the right, there was a merino.
We had 3 different ways that we decided to gather our data. Our first method was a vegetation survey. And so what we did for that was we drew 25 quadrats, each a meter squared, in a grid format. You can kind of see down here. Within those quadrats, we measured the max height of the plant, of the tallest plant. We measured the percent density of vegetation cover in the quadrat, the various plant species that were in the quadrat. We mapped each location on GPS. And lastly, we took a soil sample from almost all of the quadrats. The next method is sand movement. So for erosion pins, we had 2 transects. Transect 1 was north to south, so it went from arm to arm. Transect 2 was from the crest of the dune down to the base of the dune, and both of these were measured each week. Next, we had some Leatherman sand traps. We had 1 on the crest of the dune again, and then 1 at the base of the dune, and both of those were also measured each week. And lastly, we wanted to look at soil organic carbon. So we took 24 samples from the quadrats. Sadly, we were 1 collection tin short, but we took those samples back here. We weighed them. We dried them to remove the moisture, and then we burned them to see how much carbon was within those samples. We did that to see if there was any correlation between the amount of carbon in the samples and where they were found, the different types of vegetation communities they were near, and kind of just if there was any connection at all.
All right, so in terms of our vegetative results, as you can see in this video rendering of our dune, they really helped us understand what types of like communities and the locations that they were at. And so, for example, abundant throughout the blowout there was a lot of American beach grass, little blue stem grass, and prairie sandgrass, which are all defined as pioneer species, which are hardy tolerant species that are usually the first to colonize a barren environment, such as a sand dune. In contrast, along like the slip face of the dune and the lower windward slope were more burial tolerant trees and dune building shrubs, such as willows, red osier dogwood, black oaks, eastern cottonwoods, and common milkweed. We also saw some other plants such as rough horsetail, Gilman's goldenrod, wormwood, and spotted knapweed in these areas, which tended to be a lot more biodiverse than the blowout of the dune, as you can see there. And this map here shows our observations of the plant densities in the different quadrats that we threw throughout the dune. And so as you can see there, the densities along the slip face and the lower windward base of the dune were a lot higher than the densities in the center of the blowout of the dune, which also correlates to the biodiversity that we saw there.
So throughout our 2-week study, we recorded significant amounts of sand movement. And we have these graphs of erosion pin data. This is transect 1, transect 2. The bars below the line represent erosion, above the line represents deposition. So the greatest amount of deposition we recorded was 4 centimeters, and that was towards the northern arm of the blowout. And then the greatest amount of erosion was 5.8 centimeters, and that was within the deflation area of the blowout. And then we saw a clearer pattern on transect 2, which is parallel to the dune axis, and that shows that erosion occurred within the deflation area. And then deposition occurred on the crest where J was located and on the slip face where K and L were located. And then our sand traps showed that more sand transport occurred near the crest where trap B was than near the base where trap A was. And you can see that on our graph, which shows sand transport as grams per meter width per week. And then we also have wind data from TJ Hoffmaster State Park, which is about 4 miles north of our study location. And the highest wind speed was on October 31, which was a research day. So that's when we replaced our sand traps. And then for soil carbon, our results ranged from 0.1% to 0.7%. However, except for this outlier right here, they range from 0.1% to 0.51%. And then we have a graph of percent vegetation density versus percent soil carbon. And as shown by this graph, there's really no correlation that was found between density and carbon in soil.
All right, so in terms of vegetation, the dominant species that was present on the blowout were typically pioneer species, which are very tolerant to sand burial, the dune. More specifically, American beach grass was present during initial colonization of bare sand, and its presence indicates that the windward face is still in an early successional stage. However, the presence of more biodiversity and burial tolerant trees and dune building shrubs across the slip face and the lower windward slope of the dune indicate that these areas are further along in succession and are possibly more stabilized. And as you can see here, these photos are taken 10 years apart, and they indicate the presence of more pioneering species and communities on the dune than there were 10 years ago, which indicates that this area is in a process of stabilization.
So despite vegetative evidence of stabilization on the blowout, we recorded some high sand transport rates, which suggest that there is still ongoing activity in the blowout. This activity may prevent the establishment of species belonging to later stages of succession, because species which belong to later successional stages are less tolerant of high amounts of sand burial and sand transport. So until this sand activity calms, those species won't be able to colonize the area. We did record 2 pioneering species, little blue stem and prairie sandgrass. And although they are pioneering species, they are 2 pioneering species which are less tolerant of high amounts of sand burial. So their presence on the dune does suggest that it may be stabilizing more than it used to be in order for them to be able to inhabit this environment. So overall, our research findings indicate that the blowout is still in the initial to early stages of succession, but the magnitude of sand movement and the presence of pioneering vegetation points towards further stabilization. Thank you.
Do you think as time goes on, the dune will become more stable and more species will come in, or later succession species? Or do you think it'll stay active?
We think that it will probably continue to stabilize a little bit, but there are no sure signs that it will entirely stop.
And like while it is stabilizing, like the process will take like 150 years for it to become like actually a defined like secondary successional stage. So like it's not gonna really be stabilized in another 10 years or so. It would be a long process.
So you guys mentioned that there's a line of houses and a road in between the rest of the beach and the lake and this dune. How do you guys think that might impact what you see on this dune, or how it continues to change over the next 100 years?
One thing that I can think of is I know that lakes tend to have effect of like making the, like not making, but there's higher winds next to like right next to the lake and especially bodies of water. So I would say that this dune probably will maybe stabilize faster than other dunes that would be right next to the water, because there's just not as strong of winds as there is next to the lake.
Also, because there's houses right near it, we had some evidence of humans being in the area. Actually, I had a conversation with some of them. So, and there's some human trails surrounding the area, and evidence that it has previously installed sand fences to prevent humans creating more paths. So that human interference could also contribute to some amounts of erosion throughout the dune.
Fascinating to me. Thank you for this presentation. I don't know if you can answer this, but do you think there might be any kind of latitudinal reality to succession in the Michigan dunes? Or do you think that the climate region is enough of that it's going to behave given no kind of disturbance the same? Thanks.
In the studies I've read, so we've read some about Wilderness State Park and also Indiana dunes, and those had very similar findings to each other. So I'd suspect that since those southern dunes in Indiana and northern dunes in Wilderness are very similar, that it stays about the same. Thanks.
All right, let's give one more round. I was hoping that for your stretch that you could stretch like a tree, but I've just heard that they're not nearly at that successional stage yet. So you might have to stretch like a pioneering species, like a grass or so, waving in the wind. What the Zoom audience can't see is everybody heading for the refreshment. What we can't see from the Zoom audience is whether you are doing the stretches or not. That you are doing that in your office or for our next presentation, and in fact, this will be a theme that will carry through the next three presentations. We're going to hear a bit more about possible management strategies on dunes. And so I'll have a team introduce themselves. Let's welcome them.
Hello, my name is Emily, that's Jordan Tyler, and this is the impacts of building a boardwalk on a dune. So before the implementation of boardwalks on dunes, human activity has been observed to decrease vegetation cover and create unmanaged trails, as well as produce litter and disrupt the natural environment of the dune. A boardwalk can change that. Our question was, how did the construction of a boardwalk affect the vegetation communities in the area? We explored specifically the human impacts on vegetation.
Alrighty, so for our study objectives, we wanted to map the new boardwalk. We wanted to test it for width, heights, as well as signage around the area. Then we also wanted to investigate vegetation around the boardwalk, such as the density. And then another way was measure sand movement as the dune moves over time. And then also human impacts such as litter and unmanaged trails around the area. And then our location was PJ Hoffmaster State Park, that's in Muskegon, Michigan. And this was a large parabolic dune, and the boardwalk sat on top of the crest and slip face of this dune. And also it opened on May 30th, 2020.
Okay, so the first method included is boardwalk characteristics. Involved with this, we measured the boardwalk width, fence height, fence post height, and those were measured in centimeters and meters. We mapped the boardwalk as well, the areas of stairs, landing, viewing platforms, signs, and benches. We also mapped several human impacts, including litter and possible places where it'd be easy for someone to jump off of the boardwalk, and signs of construction under and around the boardwalk as well. And we used a GPS unit and analyzed data through our GIS, which is a graphic information geographic information system.
Alrighty, so our methods for the vegetation survey is we took multiple near the boardwalk and then unmanaged trails and then also in an unimpacted area. we would take like the unmanaged trail or the boardwalk, and we would do one right next to it, one 2 meters out, and then one 4 meters out for quadrants. And we wanted to see the density of it. We wanted to see the species, and then we also wanted to see the max height of this as well. And we also mapped this on GPS.
Another method we used was analyzing sand movement. We placed 15 total erosion pins on the crest, the slip face, and the windward side. We measured them every week. We placed 2 sand traps. They were emptied and collected after each visit, twice after. And then we took 3 different samples off of the slip face, one at the top, the middle, and the bottom, and we took those home for green size analysis.
Here are the results of the boardwalk. Here is our finalized map. And included here on the side, we have the boardwalk width, which was 244 centimeters. Fence height was 106 centimeters. Fence post height was 119 centimeters. And the boardwalk length, including this top span and along the entire boardwalk, is going to be 285 meters. And in total, we counted for 27 different stair areas, and there are 24 landings and 7 viewing platforms, which are also in parts where you'll be able to see the dune a little bit more. Here, there's 2 benches on this viewing platform. Here's another viewing platform. There's no benches there. On this viewing platform is the main one. There were 2 benches. All the benches are going to be along the fence post, and they are chained in. On this viewing platform, there are 3 benches as well, and there are 2 viewing platforms going up along the staircase of the dune climb. And on each viewing platform, there are 2 benches there. And we did notice there are 2 signs, one of which is at the base of the staircase climb, and that one did not have any information present on it. It was an empty sign space. The second sign was at the top of the dune where the dune crest is, and the highest point along the dune. That included the history of Lake Michigan dunes. The results for human impact over the course of our 3 visits there, we collected 12 pieces of litter, which included water bottles, plastic bags, different scraps of construction, including 2x4s. There were also some plastic circles. Mostly screws were found for the construction scraps. And yeah, along the time we were there, they did do some management with landscaping along the boardwalk, which included cutting some trees that were growing over the boardwalk. So they kept it clean as if someone wouldn't hit the trees as they were going along. And also involved with this, I mapped out where it'd be easiest to jump off of the boardwalk. So that included the height from the ground to where your feet would be placed on the boardwalk. And while we were there on the 3rd week, there were footprints found on the side where I predicted it would be easiest to jump off. And that spot was near one of the benches and close to the handrails by stairs. So, yeah. And then the footprints included were human, and there were a few animal footprints. I know there was one trail we weren't able to identify clearly, but one trail we were able to identify were raccoon footprints.
Alrighty, so our results for the vegetation survey were, we took number 1 and 4, those were the ones next to the boardwalk, and as you can see, we have side next to 2 meters out and then 4 meters out, and as you can see, 1 and 4 up here. These are the boardwalks, they're very low, they're density numbers here of plants, and you can see 1 and 4, even some zeros in there, and then number 5 was in an area with no human impact near it, and you can see how those density numbers have changed. And then 2 and 3 were just unmanaged trails. You can see how much the boardwalk has impacted the vegetation since it's been built.
Our results for the sand movement, we found within the erosion pins that the average difference between the 1st and 3rd reading was negative 0.3 centimeters. The highest change was number 7, which was found slightly to the side of the middle landing on the crest with an erosion of about 12.5 centimeters. The lowest was number 10 with a net of 0 centimeters, which was found on the north span of the boardwalk. For our samples, we found that grain size was smallest at the bottom of the slip face. You can see that with this fun graph here. The light blue line that's right here is our lowest sample on the bottom of the slip face. And because it's a little bit higher and pushed this way, there is more concentration of smaller grain sizes on the bottom.
Okay, for our discussion, the boardwalk characteristics tell us that the boardwalk does its job. It does limit human interaction on top of the dune system, and it does allow for movement of sand as for the system, since it is an elevated boardwalk. But the design decisions that are there, it is kind of easy for someone to jump off because of where the benches are positioned. Since they're chained up to the fence, it'd be easy for someone to get on top of the bench and get over the fence of the boardwalk and to jump onto the dune itself. Human impact, trampling of vegetation will still be present because of different things like landscaping. People are going to have to get off the boardwalk to cut down the trees, as so it wouldn't interfere with people on top of the boardwalk, and they'd also have to be careful of removing the branches that were cut down as to not trample the vegetation as much. Litter will still be around the boardwalk, and one of the characteristics of the boardwalk we did not really look into too much were trash cans. There were no trash cans located near the boardwalk or on the boardwalk at all. The nearest trash can was at the entrance of the visitor center, which was quite a walk away. So in the future, it'd be easiest to implement either signage that would also say do not litter or do not jump off the boardwalk. That'd be one dune management strategy that could be there. And there could also be an implementation of putting a trash can on the boardwalk as well.
For vegetation patterns, we don't really have data for what the unmanaged trails were like before the implementation of the Dune Plan Boardwalk, but we can see that people are still using them, which disrupts the vegetation density and regrowth on the dune. These patterns are seen through the fluctuation of densities within our transects. Another thing we noticed was a sharp line that cut the vegetation underneath the boardwalk. It's very mechanical. You can see it right here. It's just kind of a sharp vegetation, no vegetation, which we can see was just only disturbed due to the construction of the boardwalk. Within sand movement only happened mainly via the wind. The highest rate of deposition was found right at the crest underneath the boardwalk, which this means that the elevated boardwalk is doing its job in assisting the natural cycle of the dune. The grain size analysis showed similar results to the erosion pins, with the sand sizes matching that of the average unaffected dune. These push to the idea that the dune has adjusted to the boardwalk and the construction has fewer lasting impacts on this specific part of the dune.
Alrighty, so our conclusions are that the vegetation patterns, we noticed that it was directly altered underneath the boardwalk and around it was not as much, but directly underneath it, there was hardly any vegetation. And then as well, we noticed human impacts that you cannot hop off the boardwalk easy and as easily as it was before. So that really helped with that. And then also we the sand movements was regular, we noticed, and it was not very affected by the input of the new boardwalk. And then we believe in the future, as it develops more, since it was put in recently in May, we believe that it will have better of an impact than the unmanaged trails that are there now, which will start to recover, as well as the under the boardwalk, the vegetation will begin to recover as well. And thank you very much.
I have a couple questions. My first one, how do you guys measure vegetation density?
We used quadrats and we threw them randomly in that fun graph that was loaded. One right next to, or 2 meters up, 4 meters up. We threw it, we counted them, and then we multiplied them to get.
We counted the plants?
Yeah, it was plants per meter squared was the, we didn't do percent cover, we did plants per meter squared. So we counted the number of plants in that area and then multiplied it to get meter squared.
I would also like to add that it was in relation to the trail and also so it's that same strategy along both the unmanaged trail that went through the center of the dune, and we also used the same point around the boardwalk. So it's relation to both.
Okay, nice. My second question is whether you've been working with the park to like tell them that they should be putting trash cans on, or like maybe give them that offer that you have.
We don't really have any specific communication with the park managers, but I mean, like, I suppose we could. Yeah, we could easily give them some small suggestions that could make a pretty lasting impact.
Is there any vegetation under the boardwalk, or is it where we at?
I found that there wasn't any really. It was just basically the bare sand. You could see the mechanical line that kind of where it was built. So they pulled up a lot of the vegetation that might have been there, and it has not grown back yet.
Were the unmanaged trails connected to like the places where you seen people hop the fence, or were they hopping the fence in places that weren't connected to that? It was just simply the size of the barrier.
So the unmanaged trails were there beforehand because since the boardwalk was put in recently, here is an aerial image. We kind of see it a little bit more. We have the unmanaged trail that we mapped the vegetation patterns with, and that one was pretty prominent. And the person that did jump off, they jumped off right here. And walked under the boardwalk along this side, and there was an unmanaged trail there as well. But it was covered by the boardwalk. Oh, and there were footprints along the unmanaged trails as well. That's what we noticed in the third week.
Well, we need to keep on going. So if there are more questions, the teams will be available after all of the talks are finished. So you can ask questions of any team. And this team, let's thank them. And for your stretch, as we transition, you can do your best imitation of somebody hopping over a fence.
Nice job, Brady.
It's doing so well. I just feel like out.
Okay, for our next presentation, we've got a team that looked at two different dune sites, and they are continuing the focus also on some management implications. So let's welcome our next team.
Okay, vegetation patterns and the effects of trampling on plants. I'm Jocelyn.
I'm Charles.
And I'm Kelsey. Okay, so vegetation is an essential component to a coastal dune system because it stabilizes the dune and reduces erosion rates. Vegetation is able to stabilize the dune with its long roots, which bind sand particles together. The leafy above-ground structure of the vegetation creates a buffer, slowing wind speeds down and trapping moving sand particles, thus reducing erosion. So vegetation literally builds a dune from the ground up. And as a result, trampling presents many threats to a dune system's health. For example, trampling decreases the number of plant species present in the area, and it discourages vegetation regrowth by exposing more loose bare sand. So trampling can be a pretty big problem on a dune system, especially to blowouts. Blowouts are a type of dune characterized by depression or hollow formed by wind erosion, with vegetation anchoring the arms of the dune. Without that vegetation on the arms of the dune, the blowout will continue to grow outwards, exposing more loose bare sand and increasing erosion. So for our research focus, we were interested in the vegetation patterns managers should aim for on both a natural and artificial coastal dune system. We were curious if trampling vegetation could be used as a management tool to control plant overgrowth. And we conducted a controlled trampling experiment on our artificial blowout to hypothesize how dune vegetation might respond on a natural blowout.
So, wait, okay, yeah, our first study site was First Range Dune, which is located here at Cullen University near the Business Center. It was created in 2020 so that during COVID people could still like study and stuff on the dunes, and it's about 840 square meters. And the blow we did was about 3 high, and we decided to use this two blocks so we could compare the natural and the artificial ones. And that brings us to the natural blow, which we did, which is KLH, or thistle Parker, which is located in Grand Haven, Michigan, Berwick Street. The dune is about 114 acres, but we decided to just focus on one small blow about the same size as the artificial dune here. This dune was founded in 1971, so we thought that it would be a good one since it's a pretty well established.
For our study, we had 3 main objectives. First, we wanted to measure plant communities on both natural and artificial and compare the patterns that this can tell us about the differences between the natural blowout at KLH and the man-made vegetation patterns on First Range. In addition to this, we were interested on how pedestrian and animal impacts the impacts of pedestrian and animal trampling. We also wanted to measure the erosion amounts of both the natural and the artificial dune in order to see how factors like location and vegetation levels affect erosion. In order to measure plant communities on both dunes, we created GPS maps and hand-drawn maps of vegetation communities and through 4 quadrants, noting plant species, maximum height, percent density, size of trampling within the quadrant. For trampling impacts, along with noting any human or animal trampling within quadrant 4 of the dune in general, we conducted a controlled trampling experiment on First Range Dune. To do this, we created 3 paths: a control with no trampling, a lightly trampled path with 7 pathways, and a heavily trampled path with 30 pathways. In order to measure erosion on both the natural and artificial dune, we placed and created a GPS map of where our erosion points were. And you can see these locations on the GPS map at the bottom.
Okay, so for our first result, this is our vegetation on First Range Dune, which is on here on campus. So this is our artificial dune that we're studying. So as you can see here, this is a hand-drawn map that we made to show the different vegetation patterns and species that were present. So as you can see, we drew 4 quadrants, 1, 2, 3, and 4 around the dune. And as you can see, a lot of the species present were basically the same, which would make sense because on artificial dune, a lot of the species are the same and are in the same locations. So an example would be up here is mainly milkweed, and that's basically the only species that was present up there. And then this is our species present map of KLH, which is the natural dune that we studied on. So as you can see, there's a lot more variety in color on this map that we made. We also threw 4 quadrats about in the same location as well. And as you can see here in the species present, there's a lot more diversity. And also even just in the percent cover, there was a lot more density that we found based off of our quadrats. So then our third result was our trampling study that we performed on Perseverance Dune. So here are our 3 groups. We have our heavy, light, and control. So as you can see, the heavy trampling had the most impact as it went down the most from week 1 down to week 3. Light trampling did have some impact, not as much as heavy. And then you can also see here our control group did have a little bit of impact, which was interesting to see, which we maybe think was caused by the deer tracks that we found present on this dune, or also because of the seasonal changes throughout our research. And then this is our erosion pin and sand movement data that we found. So we did place 10 erosion pins on each dune. And as you can see, almost all of them except 5 here on KLH had erosion, and only number 5 was the only one that had some deposition. So these are all our locations over here. So based on our numbers, the erosion pins that had the most impact were about the ones that were typically around like the bottom or the bottom to blowout and like the windward. So like number 3, sometimes number 5 and number 7 on Perseverance Dune, and also number 3 and 8 on KLH.
Based on our results, we found that Perseverance Dune had 4 clumped communities, meaning that one type of plant is found grouped with the same species instead of interspersed. We believe that in order to mimic the natural structure and ecosystem found in the natural KLH blowout, managers of Perseverance Dune should try to create more mixed and varied. Additionally, we found that trampling could be used to manage overgrowth of plants, specifically grasses, as that is what we studied in our we think that light trampling would be best for this, as it allows for some thinning of the plants without killing all of the plants. Along with this, we found that in areas where less erosion is wanted, managers should create a higher plant density to stabilize that spot.
So for our conclusion, we have concluded that higher trampling levels can cause significant damage in plant height and density, as we saw based on our data. And we also do think managers can apply these findings to help arrange plant communities on their dunes and blowouts. But we think they should do it by having higher levels of density and diversity in order to control the blowout and how it looks. That's it. Thank you.
But like, if they want to actually bring a pole, like the grasses, because I've been told that grasses are a big thing to keep doing strong. So I guess I don't understand.
So you're right about that, but this is an artificial dune, and so it doesn't experience the same factors that real dune would.
Okay.
So sometimes like the plants could get to be dense and outperform other species. So this would be able to control. Also, something we did not mention is that some dune vegetation, it does thrive when it's partially buried. So by trampling, it could also like help it regenerate, as well as get rid of invasive species that are not adapted to the trampling whatsoever.
Curious about what you saw on the artificial dune compared to the KLH dune. You mentioned the idea of like on the artificial dune, maybe having dune managers promote different species of plants, things of that nature. What kind of observations of animal activity did you see compared to the, the artificial Perseverance dune to the natural dune? and what interplay do you think that might promote? Like, I'm wondering if the diversity of the Perseverance Dune and planting those things would attract more animals, or maybe there's just no evidence of animals over there at all. So I'm really curious if you could just comment on those things. Thanks.
Yeah, so on Perseverance, we did see several deer tracks. I mapped some trailing all the way up to the top to the rest of the dune from the bottom, and then thought we saw raccoon prints. Most of the deer prints were near the vegetation, and I don't remember where the raccoon prints were in deer vegetation. And then I do not remember what we saw in KLH. I don't think we saw it in trampling. There was a full-on trample there.
So, yeah, sure. Yeah, we didn't see as much, but the evidence, it was all very windy, so it could have blown.
Thanks for, that's a really good detailed management plan. You talked about both getting more species and like spreading this out in a more natural way. One of those two do you think is more important, or like should be the focus?
I feel like the main difference on fertility was the more functional species, so I think that would be more helpful. I'm not entirely sure, but that's what I would.
We'll have to move on.
Okay.
All right, let's thank this. And we do not advocate non-professionals going out and trampling any dune near you, but now for your stretch, you can actually imitate trampling.
Here we go.
This is such a good picture. This is such a good picture.
Okay, for our last presentation, we're going to hear some themes that you've already heard, plus an additional management technique, fences, that we haven't covered yet today. So let's welcome our last presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Corinne.
I'm Rebecca.
I'm Bethany.
I'm Maya.
And today our topic will be sand fences and rare thistle patterns of managed dune. So pitcher's thistle, also known as Circean pitcheri, is a threatened plant species that only lives in coastal dune ecosystems along the Great Lakes. It thrives with intermediate levels of sand burial, and then ideal habitats include active sand movement and reduced species diversity. Sand fences are a common management used to slow down the dune surface and stabilize dune. And our research question is, what is the relationship between sea pitcheri and sand fences? So our study area was North Beach Dune, located in Ferrysburg, Michigan, along the eastern coast of Lake Michigan. A little bit of history on the dune. So back in the early 2000s, North Beach Dune was owned by two different companies. But basically, Ottawa County Parks and Rec only owned the bottom half of the dune. But in 2005, they got official ownership of the entire dune. and begin active management. This included planting new Amacula breviligulata, or American beach grass, specifically on the top of the dune because there's a lot of bare sand and it needed to be stabilized. They also began building a boardwalk that goes around the entire dune, so it goes kind of along the crest here, and then it just goes around on the arms. And then also deploying sand fences to stabilize the surface of the dune. Like I said, there's a lot of bare sand and that sand moves, so it needs to be stabilized. Research objectives. So our research objectives were to map as many Cercium pitcheri points as possible. And this included the age, herbivory, and health of the plants. We also wanted to map the sand fence locations and the characteristics of them. So just kind of like the overall physical condition of the fences. And then while doing that, also analyze the relationship between sand fences and Cercium pitcheri.
So our first method was to use the GPS trimble systems to map as many pitcher thistle as possible. Each of these points were categorized by age and health. So this is our scale that we use, moving from less than 25% alive leaves to greater than 75% alive leaves. We also measured the amount of herbivory by noting the percentage of the leaves that were eaten versus uneaten. Yeah. Our second method was observing the fences. So we continued to map these on our GPS so they could be used in our graph. Noting condition of the fences using this rating scale from 1 to 5. There was no perfectly intact fences because this was started 20 years ago. Moving to more than 50% or less than 50% broken and upright, and then moving along until it's completely either buried or flat on the ground. But yeah, this rating scale was dependent on the fence broken and the angle above ground. We also collected local variables such as the surrounding plant cover in polygons, also on the map. We collected erosion and deposition data using foldable rulers. We measured from the sand to the top of this metal post to just measure the height, and then that was starting the second week, and then the third week we measured it again, showing the amount of either erosion or deposition, and we looked at that later. We also measured wind speed and direction using handheld anemometers and a compass, and once again, plant polygons.
This is the map that we created based on the data that we collected on our GPS units. Each of those individual points there represents a Cercium pitcheri plant. The darker colored dots represent the older plants and the lighter ones the younger ones. We also mapped 26 vegetation polygons. The darker ones represent higher density vegetation, and the lighter ones are lower density vegetation. We also mapped out the different fences. The different colors represent how intact the fences were based on our scale. And in total, we mapped 892 individual plants. In the polygons, we primarily found Amacula breviligulata, and as you can see, a majority of the Cercium pitcheri were clustered on the south arm.
This is a graph of the results of our thistle age distribution. As you can see, most Cercium pitcheri were either adults or seedlings. However, we found plants in every single age category, including juveniles, dead flowered plants, and currently flowering.
Here we have a graph of the different vegetation quadrants. Right here, we have the one where the most of the thistles were, 0 to 25% vegetation cover, which indicates that Cercium pitcheri most like to be in 0 to 25% vegetation covered range.
This is our fence condition results graph. As you can see, all fences were damaged. We have no fences in the level 1 rating scale. However, we found that the largest percentage were upright and less than 50% broken, as represented by the level 2 rating scale.
Here we have a graph of Cirsium pitcheri in relation to fences. As you can see, there's a slight downward trend as you go further from the fences. However, we decided that the correlation was not strong enough to indicate a relationship between Cirsium pitcheri and fences.
So we found that Cirsium pitcheri favors habitats with low to medium vegetation cover. This is likely correlated with high to medium levels of sand movement. This finding is consistent with previous studies that found that pitcher thistle thrives under intermediate levels of sand burial. However, we found a weak but little connection between sand fence placement and Cirsium pitcheri distribution. We suggest that the largest impact from removal will likely be disturbance and human trampling from removing buried fences. As we saw in our fence condition rating scale, many of the fences were broken or buried in sand.
So in total, we mapped over 800 Cirsium pitcheri on the dune, and we determined that the thistle growth was not related to fence location. In the future, studies could look at the relationship between fences and vegetation cover, and then from there, go further into detail on how vegetation cover is related to Cirsium pitcheri growth.
We would like to thank Calvin University's Geo Department, as well as Professor Deanna Van Dyke and our mentor, Ruth Eepstra, for coming with us every single week and also helping us gather.
Did the distance between the plant and the sand fence matter if it was upwind or downwind?
We were unable to look at just in front of or behind the fence. Each of those distances is behind and in front of the fence. So the 0 to 1 meter range is 1 meter in front of and behind each individual fence.
Your findings with the fences and the current state of the Cirsium pitcheri, what would be your recommendations to the zoo managers in terms of trying to replace fences or just leave them down in order to not disturb the current population?
So I think that we all agree that a lot of the fences that were buried, it would do a lot more damage to the dune to take them out than to just leave them there. So as far as that, I don't think it's worth it to remove it just yet because it will cause a lot of them. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you guys did this study again, or could go back to the beginning, if there was anything you changed about how you did it, or if you could continue doing it, what you would continue to look at.
Definitely one error that occurred was week 1. We measured the height of the fences rather than the posts. We used the posts as erosion pins, which because they stayed the same height based on where they were, but because we measured the fences, we weren't able to use the data from the first week. So that is one thing.
One thing that I think would also be interesting was we decided to map the polygons partially through our study, and because we had extra time, and so we did not actually use quadrats and like map specific plant species or more detailed density measurements. And I think that would have been really interesting if we had.
Additionally, even though there was a lot of Cirsium pitcheri on the south arm, we actually didn't finish mapping all of them on the south arm. So if going back, we would probably start there so we could get all of them done.
Let's thank this group. And I would like to thank all of our presenters today and also, sorry. I'd like to enter our presenters. And let you know that as you're leaving, if you've got some questions, seek out some of the presenters, ask them more about their topics. I'd also like to thank all of the audience for coming and for being interested and for asking great questions. So we really appreciate you. Let's give our presenters one more round of applause.